won the award for happiest country in the world.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about Scandinavian countries, don't we, in comparisons, and it's worth remembering how small some of those countries are. Do you know what I mean? And that the comparison isn't quite a copy and paste comparison. That's possible.
Yeah. But the point I was wanting to make is that there does seem to be some dishonesty in what we were told in the.
In the campaign.
During the campaign. And I don't understand it because talking to people around me, the consensus appeared to be that, yes, taxes will have to go up because the country needs fixing. So they would have still won the election had they said, we're going to tax people, but we're not going to tax you, who's only on 20 grand a year or 30 grand a year. We're going to tax people who are on 80,000, 100,000 pounds a year. To me, that would have been popular.
Well, there's a large number of people. I mean, obviously it's not the average wage, but there's a fairly large chunk of people on what can only be described as strong salaries who themselves are struggling already. So they perhaps wanted to protect them as well with this big overarching commitment not to raise income tax. When I say protect them, I mean protect their vote, get their vote.
Yeah, but those are those questions that one has to ask, and there probably isn't an answer to. There's always going to be somebody who falls within a net, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, which again speaks to what Natasha was saying earlier on, Pascal, which is that if you do a tax that largely affects everybody, then you don't have sort of silos of resentment, do you? Well, arguably you might have a whole population resentment, but in a way, given how they've gone about things in the first year and a half of being in power, they've built up a fair bit of resentment anyway, haven't they, this Labour government? And it happened very quickly, which is the worst thing about it. I mean, I wonder about that quite a lot, whether it's a function of, maybe it's a combination of both a function of what they've done and how they've done it, but also the mood the country is in and the state that the country is in financially. There was a report out yesterday suggesting that half of voters, I think it was half, a large number of voters, feeling that the cost of living crisis would literally never end for them. If you're feeling like that, maybe me glibly saying, would you prefer an income tax rise, elicits a firm no from you. We're going to get a whole panoply tomorrow of changes to taxation and arguably to benefits as well. It won't just be about taxation, this budget. I wonder whether you think that it is time for the government to be bold rather than just cherry pick all over the place to try and raise funds, because it certainly won't be raising the kind of funds that an income tax rise would. Which would you prefer? All those small tax hikes or a bolder big one like income tax? 0345 6060 973 is the number. We'll hear in a minute from Michael Crick, political journalist who's the author of the book One Party After Another, The Disruptive Life of Nigel Farage. He'll give us his take on Nigel Farage's response to former classmates' claims that he was racially abusive to them. That's all coming up after the news headlines with Tim Humphrey.
A US official has told American broadcaster ABC News that a Ukrainian delegation has agreed with the United States on the terms of a potential peace deal. US and Russian delegations are meeting in Abu Dhabi. Pre-packaged milkshakes and lattes will be made subject to the sugar tax, but the move will not affect drinks made on site in cafes and restaurants. Father Ted co-creator Graham Linehan has been found guilty of criminal damage to a phone and fined, but cleared of harassing a trans activist last October. Prosecutors argued his social media posts were abusive, something he always denied. LBC weather, mostly dry with some sunny spells, light rain in the north and east, and a high of 9 degrees.
This is LBC.
Buying a home on a holiday park was the retreat you always wanted. But then came unexpected site fee increases, and that was before the dramatic loss in value. If you bought a home on a holiday park in the UK, you may have been missold. HolidayParkAdviceCentre.co.uk could help you receive thousands in compensation. Text ASSIST to 78900. That's ASSIST to 78900.
Do you know your state pension age? No. Maybe you're not sure, or you don't know how to check. It's so quick and easy to check online. All you need is your date of birth. Knowing your state pension age helps you think about your future. So check yours today. Search state pension age on gov.uk and simply enter your date of birth. State pension age. It's good to know.
There's an old Thai saying that roughly translates as, the family who takes the internet on holiday can locate a less crowded beach. Particularly handy, my friends, if it's peak mating season for nippy little crabs. Back the internet with an easy arrow. That's AIRALO.
A southern train is a place where you can wind down, catch up. A chance to let conversations flow and plans unfold. And swap doomscrolling for telling stories, too good for the group chat. Make the journey part of the joy and save 1/3 with off-peak group tickets at southernrailway.com. Terms apply.
Sheila Fogarty on LBC. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
Raising taxes to pay for benefits, that's what the Conservative mantra is already about the budget, and my guess is it will be that tomorrow once the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, around now, she'll be speaking this time tomorrow, announcing the decisions that she's made over taxation and spending. I think me throwing benefits into our conversation is an important element here, because we've seen how sensitive an issue it is for the Labour Party, the Parliamentary Labour Party. We've seen that backbenchers can defeat the government on decisions on benefit cuts and benefit changes. So to box themselves into that corner and saying no, absolutely not, to an income tax rise, I wonder whether there will just be different ways of raising money through income tax. The thresholds is one of them, obviously. I wonder whether there'll be different rates and different changes. Who knows? We'll find out tomorrow. But would you rather that the government just took the bull by the horns and raised income tax a bit for all of us, or most of us, rather than this sort of salami slicing of our money in different ways and smaller taxes here and there? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. I'll get back to my conversation with you in just a few minutes. Before that, though, the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has been answering questions about claims by former classmates. This was in a Guardian investigation. Claims by former classmates that he was racially abusive to them. He says he has never directly racially abused anybody. Speaking in Wales yesterday, the Reform UK leader downplayed these claims that he used racist or anti-Semitic language as a teenager at school.
Did you racially abuse fellow pupils when you were at school?
No, this is 49 years ago, by the way. 49 years ago. Have I ever tried to take it out on any individual on the basis of where they're from? No.
At school, categorically on the record, you did not racially abuse fellow pupils?
I would never, ever do it in a hurtful or insulting way.
That's not quite the same as not doing it.
It's 49 years ago. It's 49 years ago.
What difference is the time?
Isn't it? Well, I just entered my teens. Can I remember everything that happened at school? No, I can't. Have I ever been part of an extremist organisation or engaged in direct, unpleasant personal abuse, genuine abuse on that basis? No.
You're not quite, that's very, very caveated, you're not quite ruling this out. The question is, did you ever racially abuse fellow pupils at school? You've caveated
not
it
with intent.
Not with intent. What do you mean not with intent? I don't understand what you mean by not with intent. What does that mean?
You wouldn't do.
But what does that mean?
No.
No what?
No. I have never directly really tried to go and hurt anybody.
Well, that was then. Now, if you see what I mean. In September 2013, so a long time ago, Channel 4 obtained a letter written back in 1981 by a young English teacher begging the master of the college to reconsider a decision to appoint Nigel Farage as a prefect whilst he was a pupil at Dulwich College. This was over allegations that he had made fascist and racist remarks as a schoolboy at the college. Here is how Nigel Farage, then, he was UKIP leader at the time, responded in a rather lively interview with Michael Crick. We'll talk to Michael in a minute. He was then political correspondent at Channel 4.
See the letter?
I've seen it before.
Have you?
Well, not for 30 years.
Yes, of course. I said some ridiculous things.
Racist things?
Not necessarily.
necessarily racist things.
Not necessarily racist.
Well, it depends how you define it. You see, I mean, you've got to remember that ever since 1968, up until the last couple of years, we've not been able in this country intelligently to discuss immigration, to discuss integration. It's all been a buried subject, and that's happened through academia, it's happened through politics and the media.
But I mean, that letter, for instance, it cites an example of you taunting someone in class and having to be excluded.
I was excluded.
By implication on racial grounds.
I was excluded from class dozens of times over the years for all sorts
racist
of
comments?
reasons. No, I don't accept that. You know,
I mean, it's not just that.
I was excluded
Fellow
from class.
pupils remember you making racist comments.
Well, I might have wound some of them up too, but all through.
So you made racist comments to wind people up?
Well, Michael joins me now. Michael Crick, political journalist and author of that book, The Disruptive Life of Nigel Farage. Hi, Michael. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello. Sorry about the noise in the background.
Yes, okay. I'm sure we'll live with it. A bit of radio won't kill us. He seems to be saying, both then and now, this is a bit of banter or misunderstanding.
Well, yeah, that's his line sort of then and now. I mean, only a few weeks ago, his barrister was telling The Guardian that he emphatically denied these allegations and that if The Guardian made them, that they would be sued, and that would include suing for aggravated damages and for malicious publication. So he's all over the place on this. And what was fascinating about yesterday's interview is, he did seem very much on the defensive and rattled yesterday, I think, which is Farage you don't normally see.
No, and he was choosing language very carefully indeed, wasn't he? Or he seemed to be.
Yeah, I mean, he sort of tries to make light of it and brush it off and hope it'll go away. And perhaps, that sort of worked back in 2013. And he did the same when I brought out my biography 3 years ago. But now, of course, Downing Street's in his sights. It's a much more serious proposition. And this could be seriously damaging to him and his party. And the problem he's got is, I mean, his spokesman said the other day, it's one person's word against another. But it isn't. It's one person's word against about 20 others now. There are so many people who recall so many incidents with similar features that he's lacking credibility.
Isn't it fair to say that if somebody does have you in their sights politically, and I'm speaking theoretically here, I'm not suggesting anything about the claims made by those individuals, but if somebody does have you in their sights politically, we could all say somebody said something to us 49 years ago, and then it's a question of, was it true, was it not? And then it's also a question from a voting perspective, do I care what a politician said when they were 15?
Well, I think that the idea that all of these people are sort of colluding, or even as individuals saying this in order to damage Farage, I think it's unlikely that it would occur on that scale with such similarity. And I think that when you listen, as I have done, to Jewish people describing how Farage, who said they should be gassed, said that Hitler was right, and singing the song, the horrible song, which started off "Gas 'em all, to the tune of the old-fashioned song "Bless 'em all." It is such a powerful testimony that I don't really think you can say, this is all a political conspiracy and all of these people are hate Farage.
I was going to say, and if that is true, that these moments happened, then it's up to voters, isn't it, to decide whether they think he was a posh idiot at a posh college when he was a kid. I'll judge him on the here and now. Thanks. People will respond like that. Some will.
Yeah, I think you're right. Some will, and I would also say that I don't think any evidence whatsoever that Farage is anti-Semitic now, or that he's been anti-Semitic during his adult life. I mean, it's interesting, there's so much of Farage you do see in the Dulwich Schoolboy, and he clearly developed his political outlook there, and his huge concern for immigration, his English nationalism, his Thatcherite economics, and he regarded Powell and King Joseph as his political heroes. But he does, to be fair to him, he does seem to have dropped his overt racism from his life. When I wrote my book, I frequently ask people, has he said anything in your experience, in your hearing, that he's racist? And many of these people were critics of that, people who life.
But he must know that saying, because it really struck me listening to that clip there, when he says, I would never ever do it in a hurtful or insulting way. It being be racially abusive.
Yes.
Most of us, I think, can look back on our, well, if we, I'll ask myself, I'm sure you've asked yours, I'm pretty sure I can look back on my school life and know that I never insulted anybody in a racist way or an anti-Semitic way.
Quite, and I think most of us do.
It shouldn't be difficult to answer, should it?
We're not really talking, you can think of mild forms of racist abuse, but these songs and talking about people being gassed and Hitler being right, this is to Jewish boys. That is as bad as you can get. If I were Farage, I don't think it's credible for him to say he doesn't remember. He clearly remembers a huge amount about college comics. He loves his life in college comics. He's always going back to Old Boys events. It features, it goes page after page in his memoirs. I don't think it's credible for him to say he can't remember this and doing this. And if I were him, I would change tack. Well, it may be too late now, but what he should have done is actually contact the complainants, and it wouldn't be too difficult. I'd be happy to help him do that, and actually say, I am really, really sorry if I caused huge offence and hurt, which is, stay with them the rest of their lives. And, let me assure you, that is not the Nigel Farage of now. I am not anti-Semitic now. Farage is actually a huge supporter of Israel. So I don't think you can say he's at all anti-Semitic now. But, it might be the better way to get out of this. But
kind of restorative justice approach.
Sorry?
Kind of restorative justice. And in a way, given that he is, saying certainly on a weekly basis that he could be the next Prime Minister,
Indeed.
That has to be addressed in a different way than if he's just a sort of agitator kind of politician.
It has to be. And it can be seriously damaging to him politically. There are only about 1/3 of a million Jews in this country. There'll be millions and millions of people who will be uncomfortable, to put it mildly, at hearing this stuff, even if it was 45 years ago, and seeing Farage's response. Sort of admitting that something bad did go wrong, but he doesn't really remember and he doesn't want to talk about it, and then at the same time his barrister is saying that it's wholly untrue and he's going to sue. The inconsistencies there. He's got to get his act together on this, and he will lose donors as well to his party.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I must leave it there, but thank you, Michael. Michael Crick, political journalist, author of that book. I mentioned it again, One Party After Another, The Disruptive Life of Nigel Farage. We are going to be talking about this issue and whether you think Nigel Farage's responses were satisfactory, what they leave you thinking and feeling about the man who, as I said, repeatedly tells you he could be the next Prime Minister. We'll talk about that after 3 today, 1:46.
The Budget on LBC. Unemployment rising, growth flatlining, and a £20 billion black hole in public finances.
At the budget last year, I fixed the foundations. I put our public finances back on a firm footing and began rebuilding our economy.
How will Chancellor Rachel Reeves look at balancing the books?
They have given up trying to get the government to live within its means, and they have given up on not raising tax.
Join me, Sheila Fogarty, for the budget live and in full as the Chancellor sets out her tax and spending plans for the next year.
Then join me, Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster for expert analysis to help break it all down, and of course we'll take your calls.
Is my car going to be more expensive to run?
Will my council tax go up?
So what does this mean for my mortgage then?
The Budget, tomorrow on LBC.
Things are really heating up in the country's smallest house. Dad, squealed Mia Mouse. We could save around £100 by setting the boiler flow temperature to 60 degrees.
And turning radiators down in rooms we don't use.
Interrupted Mo. Yes, Mo, turn them down, not off, said Mia.
Plus finding and blocking drafts,
said Mo. Should save enough to increase our allowance? A little saves a lot. You could save around £100 a year off your energy bills with 3 tips at gov.uk/clean energy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard your flight to Geneva. This is your captain speaking, and I would like to take a second to welcome our very special guests. All the skis and snowboards that enjoy a free flight to Winter Wonderland.
The best winter holidays start with the right airline.
Head to Winter Wonderland now on Swiss.com and enjoy free gear transport.
Let's hear from the Chancellor, Geoffrey.
From the Chancellor, Nigel. Chancellor John.
Norman.
Kenneth.
Gordon.
Alistair.
George.
Philip.
Sajid.
Rishi.
Nadine.
Quasi.
Jeremy.
And now Rachel. Another year, another budget. Over the past 40 years, we've seen it all. Our experts will continue to filter through the noise and uncertainty, helping you make the most of your tax allowances. Hargreaves Lansdown, helping Britain invest through it all. Capital at risk. Tax rules apply and can change.
They did it again. Flour instead of flowers on my birthday. I'm 95 minutes late, but it's hard to leave when you've shared so much. Your postcode, your gluten intolerance. Then I saw it. 25% off your first Ocado shop. Plus free delivery. And I just knew I'd found the online supermarket of my dreams. Ocado. Life delivered. Geographical restrictions. Min spend £60. Max saving £20. Charges and Christmas restrictions apply. New customers only. Terms at ocado.com.
40 million people listen to commercial radio each week. That's 80 million ears, give or take. Amplify your advertising at radiocentre.org.
A Thameslink train is a place where you can wind down and catch up. A chance to let conversations flow and plans unfold. And swap doomscrolling for telling stories. Too good for the group chat. Make the journey part of the joy and save 1/3 with off-peak group tickets at thameslinkrailway.com. Terms apply.
Sheila Fogarty on LBC. Call 0345 6060973.
John has texted to say, Sheila, raising income tax is simplistic, populist, achieves nothing. I'm sure it achieves nothing, but anyway. We have zero growth and stagnation unless we boldly spend, invest in infrastructure and tax the rich and wealthy. We will go nowhere. That's from John in Lewis. Francesca's call from Southwark on this question of how the Chancellor should tax and what decisions she should make tomorrow. Hi, Francesca.
Hello, Sheila.
How do you see it?
Well, Starmer said he would make the broadest shoulders carry the burden. And the broadest shoulders are the super rich and the mega rich. It's not anyone who has a working wage, even if not 100,000, which is no small feat. But if I had 10 million tomorrow morning and I was asked to pay 2% tax to help this country get out of the mess and put it on firm footings, I wouldn't feel it. My life wouldn't change. I'd still have my cars and my yachts and my houses. It wouldn't impact me, but it would be the right thing to do.
Even though you've already paid your income tax, your corporation tax?
But you see, we don't tax on assets the same way that we tax on income. And until we equalise tax rates, which I think we should do, because whether you use your money from your salary to pay your mortgage or buy your food, whether you sell a painting to buy your food or buy your car, it's still all income. And I think we should equalise income. Because you think about someone that's on, say, 100,000, we think nothing of charging them 40%, and yet someone earns 3 million and we'll charge them at 20%. So it's not, we don't have equality of taxes, and I think that would be the first place to start.
And you're not moved, are you, by the argument which is made against what you've just said, which is the other types of assets? No, this isn't always true. Sometimes assets are inherited, but the other types of assets have already been taxed.
Yes, but they haven't been taxed at the same rate as income.
But the income that bought them has been taxed.
But when I buy stuff in the shops, I still have to pay VAT. I've already paid tax on my income in my income tax. Yeah. So we're all being taxed. I think there's an element of, we know that people are getting poorer. And if we put a penny on just normal working people on top of a cost of living, it's going to hurt. They're going to feel it. There's no way they're not going to feel it. Again, if I had 10 million, I would feel it. And sometimes I think it's a bit of our duty to pay taxes. If we could afford more, you know, who was Starmer talking about when he said broadest shoulders? I don't think he's talking about working people, or is he?
Well, I don't think that's what he wants you to think when he says that. No, I think he's talking about the wealthier. But it's where you draw that line. You're being very clear that you're talking about what you regard as the super rich, the mega rich. You're not talking about people who are, let's say, a household where there's 100,000 coming in with a few kids to raise and what have you. You don't think they should be taxed more than or under the system as it exists already?
No, well, I mean, if we just look at it on paper, some with 100,000 we're going to increase their taxes, and some with 10 million we're not going to touch. I mean, how do we balance that? How do we say that's a fair society?
But they would be touched by the same taxes that everybody else is touched by. You're saying fine plus more.
Yes. Because just look at, I mean, they've got mega rich, and I've got no problem with getting rich, by the way, none at all. We should all be aspiring to that, absolutely.
If you want to.
But you know, there are some millionaires out there who do believe that if they want to live in a country where we have good education, good roads, good hospitals, that they will contribute more because they have more. And, you know, it's not as if they're going to feel it. You know, I'll take someone give me 10 million tomorrow, and I will be the first to queue up to pay 2% because I'd still be rich. My life wouldn't change. But don't ask me to put another penny on working people.
Okay, thanks very much, Francesca. It's a big no from Francesca. Dennis is called from Leicester. Hi, Dennis. Dennis, hello. Can you hear us?
Hi, Sheila. Thank you for having me on the show.
Pleasure.
Yes, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Far away. You're on the radio.
Sheila, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You're on the radio. Can you hear us?
Thank you for having me on the show.
Okay, there's a problem with that line. We'll get back to it. That's not interesting for you to listen to, is it? Jeff in Bishop Stortford. Hello.
A very good afternoon to you, Sheila. Lovely to hear from you again.
Thank you.
I think we need to revisit this taxation and what it was all for. But first of all, I want to make sure I am quite happy that they increased income tax right across the board for everyone in certain areas and percentages. We need to realise that the taxation is there to provide services for the government, for the nation, such as defence, education and national health service. And the NHS, I still believe, should be protected as a national service. The other areas we have, such as protecting people who have fallen unfortunate times or unable to work, disabled, they should also have some protection involved as well. We need to make sure that we cover those costs. We need to look at how we can stimulate the economy. I've got some very good ideas which I've had put forward to a friend of mine who's an economist and an accountant. So I think we should start by raising income tax right across the board. So the basic rate goes up to 21.5%, the 40% rate goes up to 42%, the 45% goes to 47.5%, and we introduce a 30% rate in the middle.
Who for? A what? A 30% rate in the middle?
Yeah, 30% rate. So at the moment we have the threshold is 12.5, that should go to 14 or 14.5. Then the 50,000 rate that goes up to 40%, that should be kept at that rate, or should increase, say, £10,000 to 60. And then we have a 30% rate from 60 to 90. And then from 90 we have a 42.5% rate, and up to say 120 and 125 we have a 48% rate. That will bring things into the money. Everybody's making contributions, so there can be no kickback.
What you're suggesting is a genuine sort of sliding scale rather than just lines being drawn harshly.
Yes, I think so. I think if she did that, I think two things will happen. People would respect her honesty that the problem that we need to sort it out. This is the best way for everyone to contribute rather than just a few. And we have to make sure those who are able and have the wealth to do so should contribute more. There should be ways of doing that, which she is looking at. But also we need to look at stimulating the economy. If we reintroduce the tax relief on mortgages, first thing that does, it means people have more money in their pockets at the end of every month. By doing that, people go and spend that money. They're not going to be putting it in their back pocket for a weekend away somewhere. They're going to spend it. That will attract 20% VAT on what they have done. When they pay a business money to buy something, that business makes a profit. Depending on the size of the company, they either pay 90% corporation tax or 24% corporation tax on that profit. You're helping people stimulate the economy. Those people go to wholesalers, wholesalers make profit, they contribute.
Okay, I like your theories. Well, I like the fact that you worked them out in such detail. Thank you very much, Jeff. We'll see whether there's anything akin to it tomorrow. I wanted to make time for Ray.
Hi there, Sheila. Yeah, I'm just going to say, every time these subjects get discussed, we always fall into the sort of arena of rhetoric. The realities are, the harsh realities are that income tax produces the most revenue by far, by many of the income tax, national insurance and VAT. So, floating around the edges of wealth taxes and taxing these ultra super rich, they never generate enough money. Even the mansion tax we proposed
yesterday when we talked about it, it would give Rachel Reeves and indeed other members of the cabinet in those interviews that they have to do regularly something to lean on, wouldn't it, to say we are focusing on those with the broader shoulders. Here's an example, mansion tax, a couple of other examples as well. Thank you very much, Ray. Ray in Vauxhall. Now, coming up after the news at 2, I'm going to be joined by Lewis Goodall, LBC's very own. The BBC saga isn't over, despite the fact that they've advertised for the new Director General. You'll know that the execs, what's left of the execs, were in front of MPs yesterday. We'll hear some of what was said, and I want to know whether you care about the BBC full stop, and if you care, is it because you pay for it, or because you think it's good and should continue?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 2 o'clock, US media is reporting Ukraine has agreed to an amended peace proposal for its war with Russia. Russian, American and Ukrainian officials are reported to have held secret meetings in Abu Dhabi. European leaders will discuss the plans later. They have been criticised for being too favourable to Russia. 6 people have been killed in drone and missile strikes in Kyiv this morning. Mikhail Zygo is a dissident Russian journalist.
Vladimir Putin doesn't want any kind of peace. He needs war. He doesn't need to win this war. He needs this war to be continued. He doesn't need new territory.
The sugar tax is being extended to cover pre-packaged milkshakes and lattes. Means the drinks could end up being less sweet or cost us more. Secretary Wes Streeting says he's trying to make youngsters healthier.
Obesity robs children of the best possible start in life, hits the poorest hardest, sets them up for a lifetime of health problems and costs the NHS billions.
Graham Linehan's been cleared of harassment but found guilty of criminal damage to a trans activist's phone. The judge told the Father Tech creator his posts on social media were deeply unpleasant but didn't cross the boundary from the regrettable to the unacceptable. He spoke outside court after the verdict.
There are a group of dangerous men who are determined to bully women and girls and to misuse the courts and police in furtherance of a misogynistic agenda. I'm proud to have stood up to them and I will continue to do so.
A major incident has been declared in West London as it's reported fireworks could be stored in a warehouse that's on fire. Around 100 firefighters are at the 2-storey structure in Bridge Road in Southall. A 39-year-old man from the Guildford area has been arrested as part of the investigation into large-scale illegal tipping of waste at a site in Kidlington in Oxfordshire. The tip, which is 150 metres long and 12 metres high, has been declared a critical incident as it threatens the nearby River Cherwell. The surgeon who led the UK's first successful human heart transplant has died at the age of 93. Sir Terence English's daughter Mary says her family is immensely proud of him. In the city a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading up 45 points at 95.79. The pound buys $1.31 and €1.14. And LBC weather mostly dry today with sunny spells, light rain in the north and east, a high of 9 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Tim Humphrey.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Sheila Fogarty.
Hello there, good afternoon to you if you're just joining us here at LBC. What I want to do is ask you about another BC, the BBC. Do you still care about it? A room full of people who very much do got together yesterday in Parliament in front of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee. It was a hearing following 2 very high-profile resignations at the BBC, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and a threat of legal action from none other than the US President Donald Trump over that now infamous edit of his speech on January the 6th and leading up to it. Members of the BBC board, including the chair himself, Samir Shah, Robbie Gibb, another board member, and Caroline Thompson, and former advisors Michael Prescott and Caroline Daniel appeared before MPs yesterday. Now, Michael Prescott, I know that's a lot of names to throw at you, but you're going to hear from all of them, most of them. Michael Prescott, who wrote the leaked memo about failings as he saw it at the BBC, which was published then by The Telegraph, and later led to those resignations of the DG and the head of news. He said he would have treated an edited clip from the Democrats in exactly the same way.
There was no ideology at play here, no party politics. If, for example, we can take the example of the US elections report that came before the committee, if it had found that it had been Kamala Harris misrepresented, not Donald Trump, I would have acted in exactly the same way, because I don't want the BBC's coverage skewed this way or that way. I just want it to be impartial, accurate and fair.
Well, the BBC chairman, Samir Shah, said he felt, and so did the rest of the board, that the former DG, Tim Davies, still in post for now, should not have quit.
I do not think the Director General should have resigned. I think that the act by the Director of News was an honourable and proper act. I think she took responsibility, for which I will again say I applaud her for doing so. I do not think that that meant that the Director General had also had to resign. However, when you read the Director General's reason for resigning, certainly this was one factor, but he also says there were many other factors that led to that. I wish, and can I say the board wishes, that the Director General had not resigned. He had our full confidence throughout.
Well, one of the key names involved in this furore around the BBC is a man called Sir Robbie Gibb, a long-term BBC journalist, as was. He went to work in Downing Street as Government Director of Communications under Theresa May. He's now a member of the BBC board, and he had this to say.
There could be a bigger mismatch between the way I'm presented in some quarters in relation to my attitude. I think I've become weaponised in terms of how I'm perceived. Everyone would know me. I'm hugely impartial. I have friends across the political divide. I have impartiality through my bones.
Well, the Labour MP Rupert Huck on the committee asked Robbie Gibb about a piece that he'd written for The Telegraph back in 2020, stating that BBC journalists are letting their preferences show. Rupert Huck mentioned what she called an attack on the journalist Lewis Goodall. You know him, he's sitting here right in front of me. She asks whether Sir Robbie Gibb, still holds those views about the BBC, and here's a bit of his response.
I know lots of BBC journalists. I know their politics because I've been around the BBC a long time. People from very much from the left. They are, you could not tell for one second. And you mentioned Lewis Goodall. I think Lewis Goodall is a very, very talented journalist. So much so, I was the person that recruited him into the BBC in the first place. And on the basis that he came from the IPPR. He was a talented guy, and I wanted to bring people with a diversity of opinion into the BBC. My issues are not particularly focusing on him, is that where people, and that's what I was writing about at the time before I joined the board, where journalists behave in a way which the public know where they're coming from. That is a real problem. One of the things, another credit to Tim Daly and his management of the BBC, introducing some very, very clear guidelines for Twitter, X, and you don't really see those stories anymore. I think the BBC have cracked it.
Well, Lewis Goodall is with me now, presenter of Sundays with Lewis Goodall, co-host of the global podcast The News Ages, on which today I know you're talking about those exchanges, Lewis. Talented guy. Were you expecting to be mentioned in that exchange?
I mean, yes, Robbie was a bit of a father figure for me. I think you can tell there. It was just such a paternal, benign presence in the newsroom. Look,
you do not think that, to be clear, in case people are missing this out.
Yes, well, indeed, very great Darth Vader. I wasn't one. No, Robbie Gibb is himself a talented player of the political game, and I think you can see that on the select committee yesterday, where quite frankly he and the other members of the board in particular kind of ran rings around the culture select committee, which is partly a structural problem. You go from one MP to the next, and they both all have sort of, when they actually get onto a sort of interesting kind of line of argument, they run out of time and so on. But also, quite frankly, I think partly reflects the kind of politics of the committee. So.
When he said, this is from my ears pricked up, I must say, when he said, it's not my concerns weren't particularly focused on Lewis Goodall, and he had all those nice things to say about you. You're on record as saying that, in a sense, the opposite is true, that he did focus on you and your work and almost investigated.
Well, look, I was made aware, and I don't think I'm the only person to this has happened, is my understanding. I was made aware at the time that Sir Robbie was, as one executive put to me at the time, that he was watching you and that I had to be careful about everything that I was doing, which was obviously quite chilling and certainly not appropriate, in my view, for a non-executive director of the board to be getting involved in that sort of almost management of personnel. And indeed, I think that what was disappointing about the committee yesterday was that there were not more questions asked about, not just, in my case is relatively trivial, but the sort of pattern of behaviour which other people internally at the BBC have talked about, whether it is normal for a non-executive director to be getting involved in kind of giving his views on day-to-day editorial matters and questions. For example, at one point going into the sort of Newsnight offices and sort of giving a series of views there, providing views about appointment of staff, including other sort of, other people coming into the BBC, including the journalist, for example, Jess Brammer, which he sort of fought against. And I don't want to, I for so many reasons, I don't particularly want to talk about Robbie Gibb and about the BBC. I think it's an institution in many ways is becoming less and less relevant.
But the reason he matters, and that dynamic you're describing, and his version of it that was described yesterday, is that it is about the governance of the BBC, and the governance of the BBC is central to whether its editorial works well, isn't it? That's the rub.
I think there are a couple of questions about this. One is, so Robbie there talked about the idea of his knowing about the politics, in particular BBC journalists, and talked about the idea of his leaving his politics and all the impartiality goes through his bones. I have to say, that was not my experience at the BBC, and I know that was not the experience of many others since, who have said very clearly that they feel that Sir Robbie, from his perch within the governance structures of the BBC, interferes consistently from a particular political direction, and that he does that, and I, in fairness to him, as I've written, I think he, in his own head, he is doing this for what he believes are the right reasons, which he's got this obsession, this idea that the BBC's coverage is permanently skewed against the right and left. Now, the interesting thing about the exchanges yesterday, one of the relatively few interesting things, but one of the interesting things was, when repeatedly asked to provide evidence for a sort of institutional bias, both Sir Robbie and Michael Prescott, who is the man who delivered this sort of infamous dossier about BBC coverage, weren't able really to provide very much evidence beyond, from what I could see, was just a kind of instinct and a hunch, which ironically enough, of course, Sheila, is a prejudice, it is a bias, it is a belief.
And we all have instincts and hunches, and we can all find something that will feed.
Of course. And my problem, I think a lot of people who work at the BBC's problem with that particular dossier and the way that this has all been done is that if you read the interest, it reads like a sort of collection of hobby horses and almost a kind of checklist of all of the various neuroses that the cultural and political right have, whether it's sort of talking about kind of, using words like lawfare with regards to President Trump, the sort of obsession about this particular the coverage on Gaza, coverage on all sorts of different things, and any one of those, indeed all of those, may have some legitimacy to it. And as we know, any broadcast organizer as incidents. But what about the criticisms and critiques which come from the other part of the spectrum? Over-representation of, say, reform politicians, under-representation of Lib Dems or Greens, the over-reliance on kind of sort of right-wing, traditional kind of economic orthodoxies, talking about the government maxing out the credit card. You could go on and on. So I would have a lot more time for that process if I could see genuine evidence that the people themselves who are prosecuting this from within the BBC were applying the same level of introspection to themselves and their own biases and their own prejudices as they seem so willing to subject others to. There's an old question in politics, Sheila, which I think goes to the heart of this, which is who guards the guardians? And my question, if I'd been on that select committee yesterday, would have been to say,
you lot.
Indeed, A, what scrutiny are you doing to apply to your own views and your own politics, which do exist? And B, when you're going around sort of launching these investigations into this, that, and the other, who's scrutinising what you do? Who's scrutinising your work? What is the process and set of processes into how these different investigations go about? Because if you don't have good answers to that, it starts to feel a little bit like a star chamber, which I know some people at the BBC do feel.
And let's talk a bit about something that emerged, just a couple of hours ago, which is an edit by the BBC to the Reith Lectures. Now, for people who don't know what the Reith Lectures are, tell us a bit about that and what this edit is.
So I think, Sheila, this story which has emerged literally in the last hour or two, is exactly the problem with what the BBC has done to itself. So the Reith Lectures, in case people don't know, they are a very prestigious set of lectures, annual lectures, which are delivered on Radio 4 and on the World Service, which I think could be germane for reasons we can talk about, by a very distinguished figure, sometimes an academic, sometimes a distinguished sort of cultural figure, politician or whatever it happens
historian.
It goes back 75 years. It's a really prestigious thing.
It can be. It's essentially a deep dive into an issue like the law or culture or whatever.
Yeah, law, politics, culture, science, whatever it happens to be. Now, this year, the privilege of delivering these lectures fell to Rutger Bregman. Now, Mr. Bregman is a Dutch author, historian, a very distinguished historian, and he delivered the first of these lectures in person at the BBC Radio Theatre at the end of October, the 28th of October, I think it was. And think about that, keep that date in mind, because I think it matters to the timeline of the story. Now, he delivered that lecture about the future of democracy and so on. And in it contained a line on the 28th where he said that President Trump was, quote, the most openly corrupt president in American history. Now, that lecture, delivered at the end of October, was broadcast for the first time this morning on Radio 4. That line had mysteriously vanished. And Mr. Bregman, upon hearing this, Mr. Bregman, upon hearing this, has been very unhappy about it and issued his own statement online this morning. Just listen to this.
But the BBC has decided to censor the opening lecture of a series they invited me to give. They deleted the sentence in which I described Donald Trump as the most openly corrupt president in American history. That line is gone. It has been removed from the version broadcast this morning on BBC Radio 4. Last Wednesday, I was told the sentence was being discussed with US lawyers and at the highest levels inside the BBC. For days, they couldn't give me an answer. Yesterday, they finally did. And the irony could not be bigger. Because this lecture, titled A Time of Monsters, is exactly about the cowardice of today's elites. About universities, corporations, and yes, media networks bending the knee to authoritarianism.
So the question there, actually, you can hear the anger from Mr. Bregman, but the question there, of course, is that this is a very prestigious set of lectures. I'm sure BBC executives will have reviewed this text, Radio 4 executives will review this text, when it was delivered at the end of October in front of a sort of hand-picked audience of very sort of influential people and so on. They didn't have a problem with it then. Why do they have a problem with it now? And of course, that was on the 28th of October. When did the dossier, which leaked to the Telegraph, appear, which caused all this fiasco about the Panorama edit? Well, that was the 3rd of November. And since then, we've obviously had the threat of legal action from the White House. And the BBC have themselves accepted that they removed that line on the basis of legal advice. There's a statement today saying all our programmes are required to comply with the BBC's editorial guidelines. We made this decision to remove one sentence from the lecture on legal advice, i.e. the chill wind from the White House is already rippling through New Broadcasting House and their coverage. And by the way, this isn't a journalist who's doing this. That might be one thing with the BBC journalists. The whole point of these lectures is they are supposed to be informed, cerebral, grounded, reasoned, but provocative, to give us something to think about. And it is pretty disturbing, I think, that the BBC has got itself into a position where, because of an obsession about a certain element of Trump coverage, that it is now censoring what is going out on the BBC because of the threat of legal action. That is what legal action from the Trump White House is designed to do. It's designed to scare journalists. And unfortunately, this seems to have happened.
Let me say this and ask your take on it, or just your thoughts on it, really. A lot of people listening to you and I today, and we're both ex-BBC people, so obviously this interests us in a particular way, but that's not what I want my conversation with the callers to be about. Most of them probably don't listen to the Reith Lectures. No. Most of them will get their daily news maybe from it. Their kids will watch CBeebies.
Well, they listen to LBC, so rightly they don't need to.
A bit of both.
Yeah.
They're still listening to BBC. We can't get away from that. The kids will watch CBeebies. They'll have a favourite soap. They'll love Strictly and/or Traitors, and they'll see it for big sport coverage as well. That's just a sort of broad spectrum of the kind of viewing and listening habits that people have in this country. So why does this matter?
Well, I think it matters. There's a couple of reasons that it matters. One is that it goes to the heart of exactly what this whole BBC story has been about, which is, what does impartiality mean? And I think, unfortunately, and we saw this on display yesterday from Robbie Gibb and from some of the others, I think that the view which has prevailed at the BBC too much in recent years, mistakes are always made, but the view on impartiality has been a sort of milquetoast one, a feeble one. It's been one which basically says that if no one complains about something, then we've succeeded. That is not impartiality. In fact, it's the opposite of impartiality. The job of impartiality should not be to manage perception. It should be to represent fact. The fact of the matter is that with regards to this statement from Mr. Bregman, the idea that Donald Trump is the most openly corrupt president in United States history clearly would have a lot of credibility if it were ever to come up in a court of law, right?
Well, I was about to say, for people who might not be familiar with the word due is put in front of the word impartiality.
Indeed
impartiality
so.
right is due. And truth is an absolute defence.
Indeed so. And, there's two things going on there. One, most American presidents, they have their flaws, and some can be venal, and some can have, sexual peccadillos, and some can be liars, and whatever it happens to be. Very few have been brazenly corrupt.
And openly so.
Let's not forget, let's just take one example of a form of corruption, which is, of course, trying to overthrow an election. Donald Trump literally said to a Georgia election official, I just need to find 11,000 votes, right? He tried to overturn an election. That is a form of corruption. So just that alone, established fact. And so if the BBC is not in a position to be able to say without fear or favour what the truth is, then frankly I think they might need to pack up and go home. Because once you get, and you saw this in the committee yesterday as well, you had the absurdity of Mr. Prescott, who I'm sure gave a perfectly fluid performance, but nonetheless positing the idea, I'm afraid it just showed that he didn't have a very good grasp of what true impartial journalism actually is, because he was positing the idea that he was very surprised, even though he himself had watched the panorama when it went out and actually had not noticed the sort of dreaded edit, which tells you something in itself. But the fact that his justification was to say, well, I thought it might be fine because I was assuming there would be a show on Kamala Harris the next week. Kamala Harris had not been president. Kamala Harris had not tried to overturn an election. That is an ersatz, feeble, stupid understanding of what impartiality is. Impartiality isn't, on the one hand,
we spoke about
on the one hand
this week, so we need to speak about why the following.
Impartiality, ultimately, when it comes down to it, is saying the truth, and then once you've said the truth, if people don't like it, tough luck. There is an inscription. It's often talked about, right, from outside BBC headquarters, from George Orwell, who of course once worked at the BBC, which says that freedom, if it is to mean anything at all, is the ability to tell people they do things that they do not want to hear. And in my view, the BBC has not lived up to that maxim for some time enough.
And it's fairly newly there, that statue, isn't it, in the last few years?
Yeah. And by the way, and that's not lots of very hard-working journalists still within the BBC it's really hard for them at the moment. I'm talking about elements of BBC management.
Thanks very much, Lewis Goodall, presenter of Sundays Lewis Goodall, and the news agents, of course, the Global Podcast, which drops at 5 today. So do listen to that, where he and Emily and John, all three of you, will be discussing.
Emily's on holiday.
Emily's on holiday.
Honestly,
you and John.
You can't get the staff these days.
We'll be discussing this and more. Thanks very much indeed. And my question to you as a viewer, listener, reader of the BBC, and it's very broad content that isn't just about news coverage, and I think that's an important thing to have front and centre in our minds here, is if you still care for it, do you still care for it and care about its survival? If you do, is it because you pay for it? Or is it because you really, truly value its existence? Not just individual programmes, but its existence in our national life. I value it. Its existence in our national life, and I can tell you why if you want me to. But do you? 0345 6060 973. You are allowed to say no, by the way. 84850. It's called due impartiality. 223.
This is LBC.
How's the business going?
We're busier than ever, but struggling to get the staff we need.
Recruiting can be such a distraction. We gave Job Centre Plus a try, and they've really helped us out.
Really?
Yeah, it was dead easy. We got our own employer advisor, Julie, who helped advertise our jobs, shortlisted candidates for us, and let us interview at the Job Centre. We've hired some great people, and Job Centre Plus really took the hassle out of it, and there was no fee.
Brilliant. That's straight on my to-do list.
Find out more at business.gov.uk/recruit. Eligibility criteria apply.
At this time of year, we know you're snowed under. But with Halford's biggest ever Black Friday sale, you handle the shopping, we'll handle the saving. Grab up to 50% off our motoring and cycling must-haves, including tools, in-car tech, bikes and more. Whether it's Christmas gifts, everyday essentials, or just an excuse to treat yourself, we've got you covered. Pop to your local Halfords today or shop online. Offer subject to availability, full T's and C's and exclusions apply. See halfords.com for details.
They did it again. Flour instead of flowers on my birthday. And 95 minutes late. But it's hard to leave when you've shared so much. Your postcode, your gluten intolerance. Then I saw it. 25% off your first Ocado shop. Plus free delivery. And I just knew I'd found the online supermarket of my dreams. Ocado. Life delivered. Geographical restrictions. Min spend £60. Max saving £20. Charges and Christmas restrictions apply. New customers only. Terms at ocado.com.
Sheila Fogarty on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Stream, we are done today's streaming. Thank you all for those who tuned in.